Hello. So we are going to be discussing the infamous topic of chemtrails in this video. And I just want to first start by saying, personally, I was actually indifferent to chemtrails up until last May of 2025. And it was only upon sitting outside and the rare occasion where we get some fine weather here in Ireland, um, and the conditions were as such that there were no clouds present in the sky, no rain, um, and there wasn't a breeze. Lovely, mild, uh, relatively very good weather for Ireland. And I suppose providing the perfect um, conditions to be able to observe um, chemtrail or contrail or whatever terminology you like to use for this particular phenomena that has become so ubiquitous in the psyche of many, causing anxiety and fear in relation to spraying programs and what have you. Um, and yeah, I mean, so on this particular day, I sat outside and I spent several hours just watching the contrail and how it behaved over time. And um, it was quite alarming actually. So the trail itself descended to ground level over time. That's one thing I noticed. And it didn't evaporate as you would imagine water vapor should, but instead it actually, maintained this lingering linear trail, and began to descend, so over time. And eventually, after 5 or 6 hours, it actually came into my locality. It made its way down to ground level. At least some component of that trail did anyway, because from what I've learned since anyway, that the so that what actually is happening there is a process what's known as sedimentation, and there are solid materials that exist naturally in the atmosphere. Um, Cloud condensation nuclei, as they're called, and they're responsible for the natural process of cloud formation. But what seems to be happening with these contrails, is that they're creating artificial clouds, um, and this process of sedimentation then is happening as a byproduct. Now, at the time, I was quite anxious when I observed this. I thought, "Whoa, like there's definitely something been emitted by the planes of solid material, which is not, something that I'd never observed or witnessed before." So I found it quite alarming, and especially in the days subsequent to this observation, you could see surfaces at ground level, across a widespread area, were extremely dusty. Cars, windows, and just general surfaces. And so it is quite alarming to witness this. And I eventually sampled some of the material on my car and had it tested then via a very sophisticated analytical process, which would probably be this modern state of the art technique, X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. And I had found to be an increase in silica. And so I thought this was even, this caused even further alarm on the basis that, well, although it wasn't conclusive, silica is quite a dangerous substance to ingest. sandblasting was prohibited, had certain sanctions imposed on it in the 70s on account of the dangers of silica dust, causing silicosis, tumours in the lungs, etc. But also combined with the fact that silica would make for a perfect condensation nuclei in that it's hygroscopic, it can absorb moisture in the atmosphere, and would be ideally suited to the process of creating false clouds. It would be in accordance with the it would meet the requirements necessary to draw in moisture and provide a surface on which the water could condense upon and then fall back as rainwater. So it would be a useful material to employ or deploy in the atmosphere for the purposes of trying to modify the weather in some way, shape, or form. But anyway, I've alleviated my concerns around this by doing quite a bit of extensive research. I mean, silica, like a lot of other salts, aluminum salts as well, are pretty common on the Earth's surface, and make up quite a fairly considerable percentage of a lot of the terrestrial dust on the surface of the Earth in the soil that is likely to make its way into the upper atmosphere and act then as a cloud condensation nuclei for the water vapor that is subsequently emitted as a byproduct of the aircraft engine combustion. So, I actually was in contact with the Environmental Protection Agency about this, and they provided the generic answer that seems to be provided in every instance when anybody inquires about any such activity of or concerns around the potential or possibility that anybody is using substances they shouldn't be, or ejecting them from aircraft overhead. So we'll get into that anyway. So what I've done is I've compiled a rather lengthy series of questions. Some of them might seem irrelevant at first, but I think they're necessary though to get a firm handle and understanding on exactly what's happening. And this video is an introduction, albeit it's going to be quite long and detailed. But it's gonna, by maybe the fourth or fifth video, where we should hopefully get to a conclusion, all of this information will become apparent at that point, and will be referenced in a lot of this material over the conclusive summary towards the end of the series of videos, which I'm not quite sure how many there are going to be at this point, but there will probably be at least 4 or 5, maybe hour-and-a-half long videos. And I'll try and condense it as much as I can, but there's just quite a lot to all of this to consider. There's a lot of variables, and it's a type of look, and the reason I'm doing this is to try and alleviate fear, because I suffered that anxiety myself as well when I first observed this last May, and I kind of sort of couldn't unsee it once I had saw it then. But I was compelled then to go deep and look at the science and try to understand this from a logical viewpoint. And I just think it's important then as well to be armed with the correct language to approach this to be, if you are going to put forward a query to the relevant authorities, you need to be using the correct language. You can't, it'd be unwise to kind of go down the conspiratorial route, which many do, and the conversation gets shut down almost immediately. So by using the correct terminology and having a better understanding of the science, I suppose, for want of a better word, it's critical to understand the language that needs to be used to engage a serious conversation. So that's my intro, and like I said, the format of this is going to be, I've compiled a series of questions, what I think are the right questions to ask around this situation, and then I've researched the answers, and I've compiled the answers as best I can to try to condense them into as short as answer as possible, although in some cases it's not. It's necessary to be a little bit long-winded and inevitable, really. So well, I guess we'll start. There's going to be about maybe 15 questions in this first video, and I expect the video should last maybe an hour and a half, or at least an hour anyway. And yeah, like I said, this is only the introduction. So this is only the introduction, and it's not going to be conclusive, or it will be explanatory on some level, but it's kind of only the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. So I guess the best place to start here is at the start. And so the first question is, when did chemtrails first capture the public attention, and why? So it would appear that the spark of the controversy was initially a misinterpreted Air Force report titled "Weather as a Force Multiplier: Owning the Weather in 2025." And I just say as well that I've actually, this document is freely available online. You can download it and you can read it. And yeah, I've done that, and it's quite alarming, to read some of it's been, it's a speculative document, and it was speculated that they wouldn't be able to have the control over weather systems or the climate system to the extent that they would wish to have until 2025 on the basis of certain technologies not existing. I presume AI would be in that category, which would probably be the difference between able to predict climate modelling much more accurately using this type of technology versus not being in a position to do so back in 1996, I think it was when it was first published. But if you read the document, yeah, I mean, hands down, it's completely terrifying, really, when you read just the length and breadth that the military is willing to go to try to control the people, resources, etc. And it certainly doesn't help to alleviate fears or concerns. In fact, I would say it exacerbates fear, and it is, like I said, it's quite alarming to read it. But it also does mention a lot in relation to the restrictions, the legal restrictions that have come about since, with reference to the Environmental Modification Convention of 1978, I think it is. So whatever about these proposals, this speculation, there is some counter forces, and there are also some exemptions as well, which are pretty radical, but I'm going to get into all of this in a very deep way over the course of this series of videos. So stick around if you want to learn more about chemtrails, or weather modification, geoengineering, solar radiation management, which I don't agree with, by the way, at all. I don't agree with the geoengineering, even if it's happening on a small scale. But what's happening on a large scale might surprise you too. And I think people are failing to address the real elephant in the room. Like I said, we'll get to that. So let's keep going anyway. So that first document certainly did not help to. It exacerbated people's fears. The weather is a force multiplier. Owning the weather in 2025. It was a speculative paper discussing the future of weather modification for military advantage, and was seemingly interpreted as a confession that the government was already actively spraying the population with chemicals. So the term chemtrail, if you don't already know, is a blend of chemical and trail, and was coined in the 90s to distinguish these alleged deliberate sprayings from normal condensation trails, or contrails. So the term became popularized. The term chemtrail became popularized via the widespread emergence of internet and radio. During the 90s, proponents like William Thomas, a former pilot and journalist, began sharing his concerns in articles, and later on late night radio hosts Art Bell's show starting in 1999, which brought the theory to millions. The general public took advantage of the internet's far-reaching capabilities to post pictures and videos of unusual contrail patterns on the early internet, claiming they were not dissipating like normal jet engine exhausts should. Believers frequently cited real, historical and previously secret atmospheric experiments from the 50s and 60s, such as the UK's Operation Cumulus and the US germ warfare tests to bolster their claims. So yeah, Operation Cumulus, another disastrous event that happened back in the 50s or the 60s, and harbour on the Lint River. And so there was a night of torrential downpour, and it resulted in a mudslide and caused massive devastation in its wake. So you can look into that as well. So there's quite a lot to reference over the course of this as well, The theories seemingly caught on during a time of increasing environmental awareness. So this type of event didn't help to alleviate concerns. In fact, it would have just exacerbated the idea of chemtrails, which was becoming more ubiquitous with the emergence of the internet. The theory seemingly caught on during a time of increasing environmental awareness, with fears that the government was spraying barium, aluminium or pathogens for population control, mass sterilisation or mind control. So as air travel increased, more contrails appeared, and due to the higher humidity in the atmosphere, they lingered longer, which conspiracy theorists mistakenly identified as evidence of a new deliberate chemical spraying program. Regardless of the fact that claims of chemtrails are repeatedly debunked by scientists who affirm that these are merely water-based contrails persisting in specific atmospheric conditions, the theory has persisted. So just that generic, and what I believe is definitely based in logic, and science. Contrails, this water vapor is absolutely a real phenomena that results from aircraft flying at a particular altitude where the environment outside is saturated to the point that water can't evaporate. So, the water is not going to evaporate where the atmosphere is already saturated, because it has nowhere else to go. that excess water in the environment, blocks it from evaporating. Um, Now, there's a combination of factors. So the thermal effects as well, where you have the water vapor leaving the extremely hot engine, which is somewhere between 900 and 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, entering the extremely cold temperatures down to minus 40 degrees Celsius, combined with, you know, non-volatile particulates that are also released from these current modern jet engines. So some of the kerosene, like for example, kerosene isn't a straight, forward or a simple, molecule. It's not homogeneous. It's heterogeneous. It actually contains a variety of different compounds, and so the like say for example the naphtha component of the kerosene, which is an aromatic or a cyclic carbon ring, generates quite a bit of soot in the form of very fine particulates, which is completely in line or in accordance with the theory on how these weather modification companies exploit. They use silver iodide and CO2, frozen CO2 at about minus 78.5 degrees Celsius, dry ice, as it's more commonly known, and a variety of other nanoparticles as well. The kind of what the aircraft of commercial airliners are doing naturally, it actually results in the very same effect as what these weather modification, geoengineering, solar management companies do on a small scale. So again, like I said, so this soot then helps to crystallize the ice. It acts as a seeding crystal and or a seeding agent, which helps to crystallize the ice. And the water in the environment then, once crystallization occurs, the water in the environment can also be influenced by this crystallization process that happens. So again, it's a combination of factors, the thermal effects, as I mentioned, the extreme change from one atmosphere or environment to the next, coming from the water coming from the engine to the extremely cold atmosphere, the presence of the soot then, and other pre-existing condensation nuclei that exist at those altitudes. For example, volcanic ash, terrestrial dust, that are part of the natural cloud formation process. This is irrefutable. Like, you cannot deny that the contrails are formed as a result of these conditions. So, but again, they are having an effect on radiative forcing and much more so than CO2 is having. Like, it's and this is something that scientists won't disagree with. Like, the scientific community recognizes this and sees it as a threat, and a much more severe threat than the ominous CO2 that we're all told to be mindful of, and are getting taxed for, etc. So again, it's important to consider the extent of the damage that just commercial airlines are doing without, say, being loaded with chemicals, spraying chemicals such as barium and strontium, as you so often hear people referring to, alarming the public, like, needlessly. So which countries report observing chemtrails and which do not? So although they are not officially recognised, chemtrails, by the scientific communities, etc., because they're not technically correct, well, I would actually argue that, or maybe word it in such a way that although they're not chemtrails, they certainly are creating a huge chemical footprint. And we'll get into just the extent of that footprint. Maybe it'll probably be video 2 before we get there, and we'll do an extrapolation, and we'll do some extrapolation on we'll use a particular flight path for reference, and then we'll extrapolate from that the damage that has been caused on a wider scale. So which countries report observing chemtrails and which do not? In the United States, 2017 study reveals that about 10% of Americans fully believe in the conspiracy theory. In the United Kingdom, frequent reports have emerged where the BALPA, or British Airlines Association, are having to debunk claims. A high prevalence of reports exists in Canada on a similar scale to the US. A significant online community exists in Australia, including many reports concerning the phenomena. In Spain, surges in public complaints led to a national debate as recent as 2023. In Germany, a committee exists, the DLR, and is dedicated to studying the aerodynamic formation of condensation trails. A strong presence of social media, chemical hashtags, exist in India, often linked to local geopolitical tensions. In Poland, historical claims have been found to link sightings of the chemtrails to NATO. In Greece, reports of chemtrails spiked during the 2009 financial crisis. That being said, scientists and government agencies, as I previously alluded to, worldwide have consistently debunked the theory, confirming that the trails are harmless water-based contrails. Now, I would disagree with the wording there that they're certainly not harmless, and they do have a considerable effect on climate change, as I said, much more so than CO2. A 2016 study of 76 atmospheric chemists and geochemists from various countries concluded that there is no evidence of a large-scale atmospheric spraying program. So I guess when they shut down the chemtrail conversation per se, they won't listen to the idea that all planes producing this lingering linear trail is a result of spraying aluminium, barium, strontium, pathogens, etc. This is where the line is drawn and the conversation gets shut down, because personally I don't believe that to be the case myself. And as I said, we can actually explain the presence of these chemicals and why there is a signature, or why a signature does exist, and we'll get to that later on. But for now, let's just keep going with the elementary stuff first. So in the USA, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, and NASA officials have repeatedly stated that chemtrails are not real. So the State Meteorological Agency based in Spain has debunked the claims despite harassment from believers. In Indonesia, fact checkers have debunked local claims that weather modification is actually a chemtrail operation. So again, when you mention the word chemtrail, it gets shut down because it's not the correct language to be bringing to the table. Why then does the phenomenon persist? So distrust of elites, of government, which is probably understandable to some degree. Belief is driven by a fear of technology, environmental change, and a lack of trust in governments, notes the Salata Institute at Harvard. Hashtags and conspiracy theories cross borders, with the US and UK users driving much of the global online debate. And it continues for the reason of people mistaking contrails for chemtrails. These long-lasting, crisscrossing or persistent contrails and are misinterpreted by many are called chemtrails. So what is the upper and lower limit of altitude that aircraft must remain within over the course of a given flight path? Commercial aircraft generally cruise between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, often up to 42,000 feet, to maximise fuel efficiency, with mandatory minimum altitudes usually 500 to 1,000 feet for safety, except obviously during takeoff or landing. The upper limit is defined by the aircraft's service ceiling, typically 42,000 feet. The upper limit or maximum cruise is typically 41,000 to 42,000 feet, which is the standard service ceiling for many commercial jets, with reduced vertical separation minimums applied up to 41,000 feet. So generally 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a 600 meter radius over a populous area, and 500 feet above the surface in other areas except for takeoff or landing. The altitude at which pilots switch from local altimeter settings to standard pressure, often 18,000 feet, marks the transition from lower altitude airspace to high altitude flight levels. While cruising, aircraft must adhere to specific flight levels assigned by air traffic control, typically in increments of 1,000 or 2,000 feet depending on direction and altitude. So question 4. Are all aircrafts required to stay within these upper and lower limits, or do exceptions exist, and what are they? Several exceptional aircraft, albeit mostly experimental, military or specialised prototypes, are capable of flying far beyond the speed, altitude and endurance limitations of standard commercial airliners, which typically cruise at Mach 0.8 to 0.9 and at altitudes of 30,000 to 40,000 feet. These exceptions are capable of pushing the boundaries of aerodynamics, material science and engine technology to operate in the most extreme conditions, including aircraft that can be described as high altitude and hypersonic aircraft. Our first example of such an aircraft includes the North American X-15, and it is a rocket-powered aircraft that holds the official world record for the highest speed ever recorded by a manned aircraft, clocking Mach 6.7 and reaching an altitude of over 354,200 feet. That's over 67 miles high, touching the very edge of space. The SR-71 Blackbird is a reconnaissance aircraft that operated at altitudes of up to 85,000 feet and reached speeds exceeding Mach 3, which required specialised titanium construction and fuel to withstand the intense kinetic heating. So it's also important to consider the pressures and forces that are acting on these craft as they're undergoing these velocities at such altitudes, and the various temperatures that they're engaging throughout the course of their flight. And it's not, so they need to be they need to use a lot of protective materials in order to avoid corrosion to the craft. And actually what I found is that a lot of the materials that have been reported as spraying substances such as barium, strontium, aluminium, various different types of aluminium, they're actually used as preservatives on the exterior of the craft, probably in the form of a certain type of paint or lacquer, like barium hydroxide, etc. And so, these materials, although they have a high endurance to these pressures, they do degrade. And so you'll find, that as they degrade, they release debris in the very form of the material that's being reported as on the ground via lab testing and mass spec and various different techniques. That combined with the fact that there are just so many aircraft in the sky at any one time these days that, it's understandable that there's going to be they're going to leave a footprint of these chemicals, most notably in the soil below. Now, I'm not saying that that's a fairly logical explanation as to why certain materials have been reported in soil tests and water tests. In the range of, I think I heard somebody mention from the Geoengineering Watch website that they reported 3,450 parts per billion, which isn't really a lot, but it's certainly a plausible figure in terms of the degradation materials that are being released given the volume of flights by today's standards. So there's just something to consider, and we'll get more into that as we go into the series of videos. So moving on to the next one of these exceptional aircraft that's mentioned here is the NASA X-43, which is an unmanned scramjet powered demonstrator that has achieved hypersonic speeds exceeding Mach 5. The U-2 Dragon Lady is a reconnaissance plane that routinely operates at altitudes above 70,000 feet, far exceeding the capabilities of any commercial airliner. Another class of craft that are, traversing the skies above us include high altitude pseudo satellites, or HAPS for short. And some examples include the Alto Zephyr, which is a solar powered ultra lightweight aircraft designed for eternal flight in the stratosphere. And it's capable of remaining airborne for months at a time, acting as a drone for surveillance or telecommunications. So the chemistry of the atmosphere at the stratosphere level, changes significantly, and is primarily composed of ozone, if I'm not mistaken, which would certainly, that environment would be, a craft would be much more susceptible to degradation and releasing, debris, given the pressures that are acting on the craft. And as it's mentioned here, that this particular craft was designed for eternal flight, so it's probably, in constant motion overhead, and that's probably one of 1,000, or God knows how many are up there today. The NASA Helios is a solar-powered prototype that reaches altitudes near 97,000 feet and operates in near-space conditions. Future experimental supersonic and hypersonic projects include the Lockheed Martin X-59 Quest, which is designed to fly supersonic. That's Mach 1.6 to 1.8 without producing a loud sonic boom. Aiming to revolutionise air travel by allowing faster than sound flight over land. The Hermeus Quarterhouse Mk1 is a hypersonic prototype and was developed by a private company and designed to reach speeds above Mach 4. The Boom Overture is a passenger airliner that is currently under development and is designed to fly at Mach 1.7 and aims to reintroduce commercial supersonic travel by the end of the 2020s. Some examples of specialised strategic aircraft includes the MiG-25, the MiG-31, which are Russian aircraft designed for extreme high-speed interception, capable of reaching altitudes near 100,000 feet and speeds over Mach 2.8. So some key differences between these aircraft and commercial planes. So in relation to materials, instead of conventional aluminium, which most of the commercial crafts are composed of, and as I said, they're absolutely susceptible to degradation over time as well, which could account for, the huge volume of aluminium salts that are being documented via laboratory testing. Um, these aircraft use titanium, stainless steel, and carbon fibre to handle temperatures exceeding 330 degrees Celsius, which is caused by air friction. There's been reports of graphene and carbon-based compounds being reported as well by those that are outspoken about the chemtrails. And regarding the engine types, they often use specialised engines such as turbojets or afterburners, or scramjets for hypersonic flight, which are obviously too fuel inefficient for commercial use. So next question, is all aircraft fuel the same? And what exceptions exist and why? And the answer to that question is no. All aircraft fuel is not the same. While all aircraft fuels are highly refined to strict standards, they are broadly divided into two main non-interchangeable categories based on engine type, which includes jet fuel for turbine engines and avgas for piston engines. These exceptions exist to handle specific environmental conditions, most notably extreme cold. The main categories include jet fuel, Jet A, Jet A1 and Jet B, which are kerosene-based fuels used in turbine engines, designed to be stable with low volatility and high flash points, allowing for safer handling at ground level. Jet A1 aviation kerosene is the standard worldwide, with a low freezing point of minus 47 degrees Celsius, suitable for high altitude long haul flights. Jet A, which is primarily used in the US, is quite similar to Jet A1, but the main difference is that it can withstand temperatures down to minus 40 degrees as opposed to minus 47 degrees Celsius. Avgas, or aviation gasoline, is a high octane gasoline used in small piston engine propeller planes and typically contains tetraethyl lead to prevent engine knocking and detonation at high compression. Key exceptions include Jet B, or Arctic fuel as it's more commonly known. And it's used in Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States. It was specially designed with high volatility and a very low freezing point in mind. It can endure temperatures as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius without freezing. Other fuels include sustainable aviation fuel, which is a biofuel made from renewable sources. And it's used to reduce carbon emissions. And it's also designed as a drop-in fuel, which means it can be used in combination with other fuels. So it's usually blended with, say, your typical standard fuels that I've previously mentioned. And it can be used then without having to modify a pre-existing engine. Military fuels such as JP4, 5 and 8 are used by the US Navy. JP5 has a high flash point for safety on carriers. JP8 is similar to Jet A1 but contains corrosion inhibitors and anti-icing additives. Some modern smaller piston aircraft can use diesel engines which run on Jet A or standard road diesel. The primary motivation for these exceptions relates to temperature endurance, what is chemically referred to as the material's freezing point. The regular Jet A can freeze at extremely high altitudes in cold regions. Jet B and TS1 are developed to remain liquid at much lower temperatures. In relation to engine type, another factor to consider in this regard, piston engines require high octane gasoline, or avgas as it's known, to prevent pre-ignition and detonation. Turbine engines require clean burning kerosene Jet A for constant combustion. High performance piston engines need additives like lead or special mixtures to prevent engine destruction at high power settings. Sustainable aviation fuels are used to meet environmental goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, aimed at producing up to 80% fewer emissions. But from what I gather, the sustainable aviation fuels they haven't been rolled out to any great extent with the current fleet. You're probably talking less than 1% of aircraft are using these sustainable aviation fuels, and mostly the commercial aircraft are using the Jet A1, the global standard. So next question. Today we know that commercial companies exist that openly admit to emitting various chemicals, for example silver iodide, etc., into the troposphere solely for the purposes of weather and local climate manipulation. This creates chemtrails in the atmosphere, despite the persistent denial by our governments and national authorities. Why is it the case that even on the back of this open and widely known information that the chemtrail debate is still shut down? The persistence of the chemtrail debate, despite the known existence of weather modification techniques like cloud seeding, is largely due to the distinction between documented localized weather modification and the unsubstantiated large-scale conspiracy theories known as chemtrails. The debate remains shut down by mainstream scientific, governmental and aviation authorities, primarily because they define the phenomena differently, distinguishing between routine vapor-based atmospheric trails and alleged harmful high-altitude aerosol spraying. So commercial companies and government agencies do use aircraft to emit substances like silver iodide to encourage precipitation. However, this is a localized, well-documented and regulated process that occurs at lower altitudes within specific storm clouds to boost water supply. The chemtrail conspiracy argues that high-altitude, long-lasting trails from commercial jets are a secret, large-scale spraying of toxic chemicals, for example aluminium and barium, to control the population or manipulate the climate. Atmospheric scientists explain that these long-lasting criss-crossing lines are contrails, condensation trails, water vapour and soot that persist longer or shorter depending on humidity and temperature, not chemicals. A 2016 survey of 77 leading atmospheric scientists found that 98.7% had not encountered any evidence of a secret, large-scale atmospheric spraying program. Experts argue that using commercial airliners to spray chemicals from 30,000 feet is inefficient, as wind would disperse the materials over huge areas, making it ineffective for targeted local or global manipulation. Scientists note that for a global spraying program to exist, thousands of pilots, scientists and government employees would need to be involved, making a long-term cover-up highly improbable. And it does seem improbable that, somebody hasn't spoken out on the matter, given we're all at the mercy of these chemicals, if that was to be true. I mean, everybody at ground level, which I imagine most of us exist at ground level and have to exist in that region, we would be they would be exposed to it themselves. Like it beggars belief. Now, I'm not shutting down the possibility that some harmful chemicals are being used, but I'm trying to find some plausible explanation for these claims. So many believe that if a contrail lasts a long time, it must be a chemtrail. Meteorologists explain that in high humidity conditions, ice crystals from jet exhaust can persist for hours and spread into cirrus clouds. And this phenomena can be witnessed, almost on a daily basis now, depending on your location, of course, your geographic location. While not chemtrails, scientists acknowledge that increasing air traffic causes more persistent contrails, which do create a form of unintentional weather modification by trapping heat, increasing the greenhouse effect. The debate continues as a result of deep distrust in the authorities. The theory thrives on a lack of trust in government, scientists and elite institutions. The debate has recently gained momentum due to legitimate public discussions about geoengineering or solar radiation management. The theoretical proposal to spray aerosols into the stratosphere to combat climate change, while this is discussed publicly, it is often conflated with the chemtrail conspiracy, which suggests that it is already happening secretly. The theory has shifted over time, adopting language from legitimate scientific debates about climate change, which makes it harder to disprove to believers, according to researchers. In summary, the debate is shut down because the scientific community maintains that there is no evidence of secret, toxic, widespread spraying. Instead, they view the phenomenon as a combination of natural atmospheric processes, chemtrails, and to a small extent localised, intentional, and non-toxic cloud seeding. And so, look, by their own admission, they stated that the ice crystals formed by commercial aircraft really is no different to the ice crystals formed by silver iodide from a solar management or geoengineering company, and they have that similar effect, and where they block out the sun, the albedo effect, and this at night time then it has the opposite effect, where it actually traps heat, and it drives the greenhouse effect. So maybe the airliners themselves need to be held accountable for the vast quantities of these cirrus cloud formations that are being created as a byproduct of commercial airline travel. And in the next video, I'm going to go into detail to the extent, kind of extrapolate and just discuss the cumulative effects of that activity particularly. So what companies are involved with weather modification exercises today? Several private companies, research institutions, and government entities are actively involved in weather manipulation, primarily through cloud seeding to increase precipitation, reduce hail, or mitigate fog. The market is focused on addressing water scarcity and boosting agricultural output. Key companies and organisations involved include Weather Modification Incorporated, an American-based company regarded as a major player in the industry with nearly 50 years of experience in cloud seeding, aerial applications, and atmospheric research. RHS Consulting Limited, another US company, are a leading firm that specialises in cloud seeding services. The North American Weather Consultants, again based in the US, are involved in weather modification, particularly for snowpack enhancement. Snowy Hydro Limited are based in Australia and operate major cloud seeding programs in Australia. Seeding operations and atmospheric research, again based in the US, focus on operational cloud seeding projects. Ice Crystal Engineering, based in the US, again provide cloud seeding technology and materials. Stratton Park Engineering Company, operating from the United States, collaborates on advanced cloud seeding research such as with the United Arab Emirates National Centre of Meteorology, the NCM. Cloud Technologies, based in Germany, are a European-based firm who are also active in the market. MetTech from Latin America operate in Chile. And 3D, a company from Belgium, are involved in weather modification technologies. Charter Flights Aviation, an India-based company, provides aerial support for seeding exercises. Some key entities by region include the United Arab Emirates, the NCM, or National Centre for Meteorology, based in the United Arab Emirates, frequently conduct campaigns to increase rainfall using advanced specialised aircraft. China's Beijing Weather Modification Office is part of a massive state-run operation to alter weather for agriculture, water supply, and pollution control. The United States hosts various state and local entities and partner with companies like the DRI, Desert Research Institute, for winter cloud seeding in mountainous regions. Other entities mentioned in context include Make Sunsets, again a US startup involved in solar radiation management research. HARP, the notorious HARP, I'm sure we've all heard of, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Often subject to conspiracy theories, it is now managed by the University of Alaska Fairbanks for ionospheric research, not weather modification. These companies primarily use silver iodide, potassium iodide, or dry ice to stimulate precipitation, a practice that is growing in acceptance despite ongoing debates about their ecological impacts. And it's funny too, because the dry ice is CO2. It's CO2 that has been frozen down to minus 78.5 degrees Celsius, and so they're actually, emitting CO2 actively into the atmosphere, for the sake of combating global warming. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. And just in, a lot of the the repercussions of their activities are not well characterized or documented. So they could maybe, carry out a solar radiation management project in location A, and they don't quite understand the downstream effects that will occur at location B. Yet, despite this, they continue to put in applications to geoengineer, which I just think is rather foolish, given they're not quite sure. I mean, they can estimate that if location A receives a certain amount of precipitation, that location B will suffer some amount of drought. But again, like I said, it's not very well characterized. They don't fully understand, from what I gather, the implications of their actions. And this has been going on for 70 years approximately. So it's a little bit foolish in my opinion. So the next question: what government agencies are involved with conducting research into weather manipulation today? In 2026, research into weather manipulation, specifically cloud seeding for rain, snow enhancement, and emerging controversial solar geoengineering or solar radiation management, is primarily focused on understanding atmospheric physics, observing conditions, and assessing environmental impacts rather than active large-scale deployment. So they are trying to get a handle on this, and I guess this was the expected outcome when they wrote this document back in 1996. The weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather in 2025. The document, the very controversial document that was released by the Air Force, and they expected, I suppose, by now that AI would be so advanced that they'd be able to get a better handle on the downstream effects, as I mentioned previously, just about what happens in location A, and how that affects what happens in location B. So the following US government agencies and related entities are involved in researching, tracking, or coordinating studies on weather modification. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA is the central agency responsible for tracking weather modification activities within the US under the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. NOAA conducts research into atmospheric processes, cloud physics, and, in coordination with other agencies, studies the potential impacts of solar geoengineering. NOAA also investigates how artificial intelligence can improve water prediction and weather modelling. NOAA maintains a public database of weather modification reports and all cloud seeding projects. And so I've actually went onto the NOAA website, and you can find a database that's in the public domain. It's open to the public to view, and you can actually view all of the patents that are put forward for the purposes of cloud seeding and weather modification, geoengineering, solar radiation management. And you can view these documents, and it goes into detail about what they propose to do in their experiments, the chemicals they use, etc. Now, I haven't gone through all of them, but 90% of the time they're using the silver iodide. But I do intend to go through more of these documents and just to see if there are any outliers there. And one thing I will note as well, that From what I gathered, the database only goes as far back as 1999. So there's a good few years missing there. Maybe, I'm not sure when it became mandatory to apply to NOAA for the applications, or when they made it mandatory for cloud seeding companies to actually put forward an application through their institution, their agency. So other agencies include the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the OSTP, and in 2022 to 23 Congress directed the OSTP, with support from NOAA, the National Science Foundation and Department of Energy, to develop a 5-year federal research plan for solar and other rapid climate interventions. The NSF, or the National Science Foundation, supports fundamental atmospheric research and has previously funded grants relevant to solar geoengineering. The NSF funds the National Centre for Atmospheric Research. The Department of Energy, or the DOE, is involved in the interagency coordination of research into solar radiation management, focusing on modelling the climate effects of technology used for weather modification purposes. NASA coordinates with NOAA on atmospheric observational capabilities, such as sampling aerosols in the lower stratosphere for research purposes. The Bureau of Reclamation traditionally were involved in water resources management. The Bureau has historically supported and continues to have interest in cloud seeding projects to increase water availability in the western US. And so most of the projects that are listed for snowpack enhancement are to ensure the continuity of water supply. The Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation regulates cloud seeding within Texas through licensing and permitting, and is charged with promoting research into its development. Some of the key aspects of current research include, across 2025 to 2026, no active testing. The US government maintains that it is not engaged in active outdoor large-scale deployment of solar radiation management. Many state-level state partnered or commercial entities perform cloud seeding, particularly in the western US for, as I mentioned, snowpack enhancement, which is monitored by the federal government. Similar research into geoengineering has been conducted elsewhere, such as the UK's Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, funding small-scale outdoor experiments. And they recently received a grant then of a substantial funding to, from what I gather, mostly research. Again, their research is centered around trying to get a handle on downstream effects and how this cloud seeding activity, what repercussions it might have on the environment. So what methodologies do government agencies and private weather manipulation companies employ to achieve their end goal of altering climate systems? Government agencies and private weather modification companies primarily employ cloud seeding and various forms of geoengineering to alter atmospheric conditions. The main goals are to enhance local weather supplies or precipitation in the form of rain and snow, to mitigate damage from hail, to disperse fog, and more recently to combat global warming. Let us take a look at some of the specific methodologies employed. So cloud seeding, precipitation enhancement and hail suppression. Cloud seeding involves dispersing particles into clouds to act as landing pads or nuclei, cloud condensation nuclei, for water vapor to condense or freeze upon, making them heavy enough to fall as precipitation. Another is glaciogenic seeding, which targets cold, supercooled clouds below freezing to produce ice crystals. Key agents include silver iodide and dry ice, which, as I mentioned, is frozen CO2, and also liquid propane. Hygroscopic seeding targets warm clouds by dispersing salts, such as calcium chloride or sodium chloride, which is just table salt, to promote water droplet coalescence. The methods of delivery require aircraft to fly through or above clouds using flares on wings or ejecting flares from the belly of the plane. Ground-based generators also exist, which utilise remotely operated burners on the windward side of mountains, which release particles, allowing wind to carry them up into the clouds. Rockets and cannons are also employed, specifically for hail suppression in countries like Bulgaria and China, to break up large hail formation. So another form of solar management, radiation management, includes marine cloud brightening, which is aimed at local cooling. The methodology requires vessels to spray microscopic droplets of salt water into the air over the ocean. The water evaporates, leaving salt crystals that increase the reflectivity or albedo effect of low-lying marine clouds. The goal here is to reflect more sunlight back into space and cool surface temperatures, often aimed at protecting coral reefs from bleaching. So just actually on that note there, sulfur is contained within the Jet A1 fuel standard, and it can be emitted as sulfur oxides or even sulfuric acid. Which is not something that's being spoken about, or the conversation in terms of geoengineering isn't being directed at the commercial airliners. This has been overlooked, which I think needs to be brought to the surface. Stratospheric aerosol injection is a large-scale debated geoengineering method designed to counteract global warming. Its methodology involves using specialised aircraft or balloons to inject sulfate, aerosols or other reflective particles, for example calcite or diamond dust, into the stratosphere, with the overall goal to mimic the cooling effect of volcanic eruptions by creating a haze that reflects solar radiation. Other emerging methodologies include cloud ionization, which is another ground-based system which releases electrically charged particles or ions into the atmosphere to simulate natural cloud formation processes. Laser technology uses high-energy lasers to trigger condensation in the atmosphere. Surface albedo modification includes the painting of rooftops white, a relatively harmful exercise, or placing glass beads on ice, or altering crop leaves to increase reflectivity. Key actors include the United Arab Emirates, which use aircraft or drones to increase rainfall using a nanomaterial coated with titanium oxide to increase effectiveness. China operates the world's largest system using rockets and planes to increase rain and, for as reported, reducing air pollution before major events. The United States primarily uses cloud seeding in western states to increase winter snowpack for water reservoirs and to reduce hail in agriculture. Russia uses cloud seeding for agricultural hail protection and to ensure clear skies during public holidays. While cloud seeding has been practiced for over 70 years, its overall effectiveness is still debated among scientists, with studies showing mixed results, especially during severe drought when clouds are absent. So the scientific community are, not in disagreement that the process of geoengineering is not without its pitfalls. So what regulations do weather manipulation companies adhere to? Regulations for companies specialising in weather modification, such as cloud seeding, exist at international, federal and state local levels, and they vary significantly by jurisdiction. The primary international regulation is the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques, or NMOD for short. The NMOD Convention was ratified by many nations, including the US, and specifically prohibits the use of environmental modification techniques for military or any other hostile purposes that cause widespread, long-lasting or severe damage. This gets a mention in that document, the that was released in '96 by the US military, the Air Force. The convention does not, however, prohibit the use of weather modification for peaceful purposes, such as drought management or increasing water supply. So under general principles of international law, states engaging in activities that carry a significant risk of transboundary harm have a duty of self-restraint and must take measures to avoid damaging the environment of other states. So in the US, the regulatory framework is a mix of federal reporting requirements and diverse state-level laws. Federal reporting requirements, so around the topic of federal reporting requirements, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, does not regulate cloud seeding but manages mandatory reporting under the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. Companies must report details of their activities, including the substances used, like silver iodide, their operational plans and locations, and must report at least 10 days before any operations begin. Failure to report can result in fines. And you can review a public database of these projects on the NOAA Weather Modification Project Reports website. Most of the actual regulation occurs at the state level, particularly in western and midwestern states where water management is crucial. These regulations are diverse and may include that operators typically need to obtain licenses and specific permits for each project from the relevant state agency. Many states, such as Colorado and Texas, require public notice and hearings before a permit is issued. And just in relation to Texas, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the company, I think Rainmaker Technologies, who had performed some, and I think that project might actually be listed on the NOAA website. I think I found that in the database, and they kind of detail their plans on an application form, which, as I said, you can view if you go onto the NOAA website. And I thought I actually found some discrepancies there, because I thought one of the chaps that was interviewed from that company mentioned that they only released 70 grams, and maybe they did, and that was all they did on the day. But on the document itself, I think there was they had proposed to use another material besides silver iodide, and it could have been dry ice or something. But anyway, companies often must provide proof of financial responsibility and general liability insurance. Projects must comply with environmental and safety standards, though existing records suggest silver iodide, the most common agent, does not pose a major health concern at current levels. So key governing bodies and standards include the World Meteorological Organization, or the WMO for short. While not a regulator, the WMO provides guidance and recommendations on evaluation methods for weather modification projects to ensure their effectiveness and provide a reliable estimate of impact. The American Meteorological Society, or AMS, issues statements and recommendations emphasizing the need for well-designed research programs and the comprehensive addressing of risks, benefits, and any ethical issues associated with weather modification. In summary, companies adhere to a patchwork of laws that prioritise reporting, local operational oversight, and the avoidance of hostile use or significant transboundary harm. The specific requirements depend heavily on the location of the operation. Next question. Do reliable air quality records exist for Ireland, and how far back do they span? Yes, reliable extensive air quality records exist for Ireland, dating back to 1990, well before 2020. The EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, manages a network that monitors pollutants like particulate matter in the form nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide down to 2.5 micrometers. These records are used to ensure compliance with EU legal requirements, which Ireland has generally met, though they often fall short of tighter WHO, World Health Organization, health guidelines. So, just one thing to note about that they measure and detect particulate matter down to 2.5 microns. This isn't any good if most of these companies are deploying materials in the nanometer scale, which is 1,000 times smaller than what the capabilities of detection are that are employed by the EPA. Historical data, which includes the monitoring of pollutants, has been consistently collected to track trends such as the decline in sulfates following fuel bans. But the sulfates haven't actually been banned in the typical Jet A1 aviation standard that's used, predominantly. So while the network has expanded significantly, i.e. 18 new stations have been implemented since 2020, a formal monitoring infrastructure has been in place for decades. And data is seemingly available through the EPA's Air Quality in Ireland reports, which provide annual assessments and historical context. Now, I did have a look at the back last year after observing the having the test done that revealed silica. I was curious to know how far back does the air quality records date, and I didn't see anything beyond 2020. So it doesn't really provide much in the way of a reference standard, because it only goes back as far as 2020. So beyond direct monitoring, other data such as traffic and energy consumption serve as a reliable indicator for air quality trends prior to 2020. So the Air Quality in Ireland 2020 report also notes that lockdowns in that year had a significant impact on improving urban air quality, allowing for comparisons with previous more polluted years. Question 11. What analytical equipment is used by the national authorities, i.e. the EPA, to determine the air quality, to quantitatively measure and say with certainty what the air is composed of at regular intervals? The Irish Environmental Protection Agency uses a combination of automated, high precision and certified analytical equipment for air quality monitoring and compliance, and adheres to EU standards. Key technologies include chemiluminescent nitrate analyzers for nitrogen oxides, infrared gas analyzers for CO, carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, particulate monitors, or nephelometers as they're more commonly known, which measure particulates down to the 10 micron and 2 micron scale, are used in combination with continuous emissions monitoring systems. These tools provide high accuracy real-time data for compliance with industrial license requirements. But as I mentioned, they're not really too useful for detecting nanoparticles. Key analytical equipment and methods include particulate monitors, which measure dust, smoke and fume concentration only down to 2.5 microns. Chemiluminescent nitrate analyzers are used for the precise measurement of nitrogen dioxide in ambient air. Infrared gas analyzers measure concentrations of carbon monoxide and other gaseous materials by analysing infrared light absorption. Optical gas imaging cameras are advanced infrared-based imaging used to identify and quantify fugitive volatile organic compound emissions. The SEMS, or the continuous emissions monitoring systems, are stationary. Installed or portable equipment is used to provide continuous data on emissions from industrial sources. So that's more in relation to, I presume, on-the-ground activity. Air dispersion modelling, or AirMod, is the application of computational modelling used in conjunction with monitored data for environmental impact assessments. And the site then that they're standardised to the ISO 17025 certification, which is the standard that all calibrations and testing laboratories must be certified to. Does flight tracking software exist that can allow us to reconcile a given flight path to observed craft in aerospace at any given time, with a list of known commercial flights, military flights, etc., any type of flight that we happen to observe? And the answer is yes. So several flight tracking applications and platforms exist that allow for real-time identification and reconciliation of observed aircraft with known commercial flight schedules, primarily using the ADS-B, MLAT and radar data. Key tools include Flight Radar 24, Flight Aware and Plane Finder, which map live positions, flight numbers, aircraft registration and operator details. So Flight Radar, which I've heard come up in conversation quite frequently, offers a live global map identifying overhead aircraft, including commercial flights, private planes and helicopters, by combining multiple data sources. And the technology uses this automatic dependent surveillance broadcast technology, where aircraft transmit their position, allowing for accurate real-time reconciliation. Now, I've heard some people who are, very much firmly rooted in the idea that chemtrails are happening, the notorious, nefarious spraying of human populations on ground level, saying that they've tried to reconcile some flights using this Flight Radar 24, but certain craft then were not listed, let's say, on the software. I know there are a number of reasons as to why that may be the case. So some of these older craft might not have transponders, so they might not be able to send or receive signals and interact with the this technology, this automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. Also, for some aircraft may be like, for example, military, or for example, the Air Force One or something like that, maybe flying overhead, and for security reasons may not want to be identified by any tracking software, for obvious security reasons. So, question 13. If chemtrails are just ice crystals, why do they descend to the earth after a few hours and cause huge increase in dusty particulates observed on cars, in local air, etc.? Dust that can be sampled and even analysed and found to be silica, as was the case with me back last summer. So the high humidity supersaturation in the cold, humid upper atmospheric conditions above 26,000 feet, or more commonly at 40,000 feet, where commercial aircraft are typically inclined to cruise at, the exhaust vapour turns into ice crystals that cannot easily evaporate. These crystals grow by taking in surrounding moisture and can persist for hours. So the crystallization process can actually influence that, because it's a saturated environment, so they can actually influence the crystallization of water in the surrounding area. Persistent contrails can spread to become several kilometres wide, forming artificial thin cirrus clouds. Sedimentation or settling. While the ice crystals do not typically fall to the ground directly, they can slowly sink or be transported downward by turbulent air and wind currents. Now, as they reach warmer, drier air at lower altitudes, the ice sublimes and turns directly back into water vapour, which evaporates. And the non-volatile particulate matter, i.e. the soot, or it can be a range of various different materials that are a cloud condensation nuclei that naturally exist in the upper troposphere and beyond. The ice can trap those particles, and as they descend, evaporate, the water evaporates again, sublimates, and this releases then the solid particulate material, which then descends to ground level and can, as in the case was observed by myself last summer, create a vividly obvious dusty amount of residuals in their wake. And it's not often that you can actually observe this phenomena, because the weather is so windy and wet, and there's so many clouds that it's almost impossible to track this phenomena. So jet fuel combustion releases water vapour, CO2 and trace particulates, non-volatile particulate material, including soot, sulfur oxides and unburned hydrocarbons. The aircraft engines vent small amounts of lubricant oil into the atmosphere. This oil can form aerosol-sized particles. The contrails act as condensation nuclei, capturing not just engine soot but also naturally occurring aerosols in the upper atmosphere, such as volcanic ash, cosmic dust and terrestrial dust, that has been transported upward by weather systems. Now that terrestrial dust can include silica, it can include aluminum, salts as well, and a variety of other materials, including carbonaceous materials. So analysis of the silica. Studies have shown that samples taken from the ground, which some associate with chemtrails, often contain materials common in clay, soils and atmospheric dust like aluminium and silica. These materials are naturally occurring in the atmosphere and are not necessarily indicative of high altitude spraying. So yeah, these materials actually constitute a fairly substantial percentage of soil materials. So research, including surveys of experts, has found no evidence to support the claim that aircraft have been used for large-scale clandestine chemical spraying. The difference between a short-lived and long-lived trail is determined solely by the local humidity and temperature at which at the flight altitude, not by the substance of the exhaust. While the exhaust does contain soot and sulphur that can be harmful at ground level, like all fossil fuel emissions, the persistent trails themselves are generally considered ice crystal cirrus clouds rather than toxic chemical plumes. Now, saying that, it's almost like they're overlooking the dusty materials, but they shouldn't be overlooked. And again, in the next video, I'm going to go deeper into why they should not be overlooked. The dust observed on cars is likely the result of increased commercial air traffic, creating persistent contrails that, upon evaporation, leave behind a concentration of soot and naturally occurring atmospheric particles, which then settle back to the ground in a process known as sedimentation. So why is it that the lingering linear contrail, it seems so obvious today as something extraordinary, was not always visible or as prevalent as it is today? So the increased prevalence and visibility of lingering linear contrails today compared to previous decades is primarily driven by a massive increase in high altitude air traffic. Also, advancements in jet engine technology that make them more efficient and changes in the atmosphere itself. While they seem extraordinary today, these persistent contrails have been scientifically documented since the advent of jet travel. So, just in relation to the point they make about it being a result of a massive increase in high altitude air traffic, again, I'm going to go deeper into just how the magnitude of that scale increase and why it's concerning, and why maybe more attention needs to be paid to that. So the most straightforward reason for more frequent, long-lasting and criss-crossing contrails is that there are many more jets flying at higher altitudes. And yeah, so advances in the engine technology mean that these particular aircraft fly at higher altitudes to decrease drag and improves on fuel consumption. So more jets are flying at higher altitudes, typically above 30,000 feet, than in the 60s, 70s and 80s. The modern high-bass turbofan engines, while much more fuel efficient, creates a different exhaust profile than older turbojets. Modern engines produce cooler exhaust that contain more moisture and soot particles. This combination makes it easier for the water vapor to condense and freeze into ice crystals, which then persist in the humid or close to saturated high altitude conditions. Modern aircraft are designed to fly higher to maximize fuel efficiency. At these higher, colder and sometimes more humid altitudes, the atmospheric conditions are more often ideal for creating longer lasting persistent contrails. And as I previously alluded to, for a contrail to linger, the upper atmosphere must be cold, usually below minus 40 degrees, and humid. If the air is dry, the contrail disappears in seconds or minutes. Increased humidity at high altitudes can result in the contrail spraying out and lasting for hours, sometimes evolving into full-blown cirrus clouds. Development of the contrail cirrus. Studies have shown that in certain regions, about 80% of long-lived lingering or spreading contrails actually form within existing natural thin ice clouds or cirrus clouds. This means that sometimes the contrails are just enhancing already present high altitude clouds that were less noticeable before the explosion of air traffic. So in summary, the proliferation of persistent lingering contrails is a direct result of the dramatic growth in aviation and the technological evolution of jet engines, combined with the right atmospheric conditions at high altitudes. So if the answer to the previous question was on the basis of increased numbers of commercial flights, then what are the implications of the undeniable increase in ice nuclei, which will undoubtedly have an impact on weather manipulation, in a similar way that weather manipulation companies exploit cloud condensation nuclei to alter local climate. So yeah, I mean, what's happening in our commercial aircraft is no different to what these geoengineering companies implement. The end result is the same, that they can produce these contrails that persist and do have a role in altering radiative forces. So again, I mean, I'm open to hearing more about the evidence for the intentional spraying of barium and strontium and aluminium salts for the purposes of population control, mind control, or whatever the case may be. I'm certainly open to hearing if there's hard evidence that for that activity, but the Occam's razor, the obvious answer is probably the most likely one. So in a similar way, the weather modification companies exploit cloud condensation nuclei to alter local climate, and it's quite similar to what the commercial flights are doing as a byproduct of commercial flight travel. So when atmospheric conditions are cold and humid, supersaturated, contrails do not immediately evaporate. They persist, spread, and can last for hours or even days, turning into contrail cirrus, as we've heard many times now over the course of this talk, creating what's known as the blanket effect. So like natural cirrus clouds, these artificial clouds will allow incoming sunlight to pass through during the day, but trap heat radiating from the Earth's surface, particularly at night. While persistent contrails have both a cooling effect and a warming effect, the net impact, it has been found, and the science community won't disagree with this, they're in favour of this, the net effect is actually warming. So these contrails are having a significant impact on global warming. Studies have shown that persistent contrail cover contributes to a net warming of the atmosphere. A study published in Atmospheric Environment, which is a really good paper actually, well worth a read, a lot of detail, indicated that the climate impact of contrail cirrus is potentially larger than the accumulated historical CO2 emissions from all aircraft. Now, that's a very important point. It's somewhere in the region of, 3 times greater impact than anything CO2 is doing or is responsible for. So, but what there needs to be conversation around this. Instead of us getting hit with all these carbon taxes, etc., which and yet nobody is holding the airlines accountable for actions that are far greater in terms of their impact on climate change. So persistent contrails increase the total coverage of cirrus clouds, which alter the radiation balance of the atmosphere. Research suggests that high-density traffic areas like Europe and the USA experience significant enough coverage to potentially affect local surface temperatures, such as reducing the difference between daytime high and nighttime low temperatures. Unlike commercial cloud seeding, which purposefully introduces silver iodine into lower level clouds, contrails are an unintended byproduct of high altitude jet travel. While cloud seeding is generally local, persistent contrails can form large regional and sometimes continental scale blankets of high cloud cover. A 2024 study found that only 2% of flights cause 80% of the warming effect from contrails. So this indicates that the impact is highly concentrated on specific flights, times and areas with specific humidity levels like the North Atlantic and Europe. During COVID-19, when flight traffic was severely reduced, the reduction in contrail-induced warming was significant, validating that they have a strong influence on atmospheric radiative forcing. However, solutions are being explored. Because of their significant impact, the aviation industry is exploring ways to mitigate them by identifying ice supersaturated regions and altering flight altitudes slightly to avoid them. Other methods being employed by these airlines include the use of sustainable aviation fuels, which reduces soot, which in turn reduces the number of initial ice crystals formed, leading to faster dissipating contrails. The increase in commercial flights, especially when flying in specific atmospheric conditions, is indeed having a net warming. Cloud seeding-like impact on natural weather cycles by adding persistent cirrus clouds to the upper atmosphere. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there for this one because we've covered quite a lot. But in the next one, the next video, we hope to extrapolate on just how devastating the effects of commercial airliners is on in impacting solar radiative forcing. And we'll actually start kind of extrapolating some of the data and proposing some figures in relation to what's happening. And I think you'll find that the cumulative effects are actually quite astonishing and not to be overlooked. And it may be worthwhile that some of the activists engaged in the chemtrail conspiracy, wide-scale spraying of various different toxins, to factor in some of this, which is definitely relevant and needs to be addressed, and which most are not addressing, from what I can see today, to the extent that it should be, given the huge volume of flights that are occurring on a daily basis. Okay, so we leave it there. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to give this a like and a share, and we'll see you in the next one.